Have you ever wondered what it's like to live without a home? From bustling cities to war-torn regions, homelessness is a global crisis that touches every corner of the world. In today's video, we're diving deep into the stories behind the countries with the most significant homelessness challenges, and the shocking realities might just change how you see the world. Let's explore these heartbreaking yet eye-opening tales together. Number 10. India. India, a country of over 1.4 billion people, is known for its diversity, rich culture, and history. Yet, it grapples with a profound homelessness crisis. The challenge isn't just the numbers. Over 1.8 million people are estimated to live without a roof, but the complexity of the issues that drive this crisis. In bustling urban centers like Delhi, Mumbai, and Kolkata, families often find themselves living on sidewalks, under overpasses, or crowded into makeshift shelters. These cities embody the paradox of modern India, where gleaming skyscrapers and tech hubs coexist with sprawling slums and visible poverty. The roots of homelessness in India lie in rapid urbanization. As millions flock to cities in search of work, housing has become a scarce commodity. The boom in real estate prices has made urban homes inaccessible for the poor and lower middle-class families. Meanwhile, developers prioritize luxury apartments over affordable housing, exacerbating the divide. Many urban homeless are migrants who come to the cities with dreams of a better future, only to find themselves priced out of any reasonable accommodation. In rural areas, natural disasters play a significant role. Floods, earthquakes, and droughts displace millions each year, compounding the problem. Climate change has intensified these events, leading to more frequent and severe calamities that render families homeless overnight. Additionally, inadequate access to education and healthcare in rural regions perpetuates poverty, forcing people into cities that cannot accommodate them. India's economic growth has lifted millions out of poverty, but it has also widened the gap between the rich and poor. A lack of social safety nets and affordable housing projects remains a significant issue. Government programs like the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana aim to address the housing shortage by providing subsidies for home construction and purchase. However, bureaucracy and corruption often hinder these initiatives from reaching the most vulnerable populations. The situation is particularly dire for women and children. Millions of children live on the streets, vulnerable to abuse, exploitation, and lack of education. Many are orphans or come from broken homes, and they become trapped in cycles of poverty and homelessness. For women, domestic violence is a leading cause of homelessness, with inadequate shelters for victims compounding their suffering. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and community activists play a vital role in providing temporary shelters, food, and healthcare. These grassroots efforts, while impactful, often lack the scale to address the national crisis comprehensively. India's tech industry has led to innovative solutions, such as crowdfunding platforms and mobile apps that connect homeless people with local services. However, systemic change requires more robust government intervention and a shift in public attitude. Homelessness in India is not just about lack of shelter. It is deeply intertwined with caste, class, and regional disparities. Marginalized communities, including Dalits and tribal groups, face additional layers of discrimination and exclusion. For them, homelessness is often a continuation of historical oppression. Addressing these entrenched inequalities is crucial for meaningful progress. The pandemic has further complicated the situation. Lockdowns forced many daily wage laborers back to their villages, often with no income and inadequate support. Many returned to the cities after restrictions eased, only to find fewer opportunities and increased competition for scarce resources. The crisis also exposed the inadequacies of India's healthcare system, particularly for the urban poor. To solve this multifaceted issue, India needs a multi-pronged approach. Comprehensive urban planning, investment in affordable housing, and policies that address rural poverty and migration. Collaboration between government, private sector, and civil society can create sustainable, scalable solutions. Ensuring that everyone has access to basic shelter is not just a social obligation but a fundamental human right. 9. Nigeria. Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, presents a unique set of challenges and opportunities. The country is rich in natural resources, with oil driving much of its economy. However, this wealth has not translated into prosperity for the majority of Nigerians. Homelessness is a persistent issue, especially in major cities like Lagos, Abuja, and Kano. These cities are characterized by sprawling informal settlements, where millions live in makeshift structures or on the streets. The reasons are numerous, ranging from rapid population growth and poverty to conflict and political instability. One of Nigeria's biggest challenges is the ongoing conflict in the northeastern region, where groups like Boko Haram have displaced over 2.4 million people. These internally displaced persons, IDPs, often live in overcrowded camps that lack basic sanitation, food, and medical care. While international organizations provide some support, the resources are insufficient to meet the overwhelming needs. Children in these camps face malnutrition and limited educational opportunities, creating a cycle of poverty and hopelessness. Urban homelessness in Nigeria is exacerbated by the country's rapid urbanization. Lagos, the economic hub, is one of the fastest-growing cities globally, but its infrastructure and housing capacity lag behind. Many people live in slums that are prone to flooding, disease outbreaks, and eviction. The lack of affordable housing options pushes low-income families into precarious living conditions. Gentrification and forced evictions further displace poor residents, making the housing crisis more acute. Corruption is a significant barrier to progress. Funds allocated for social housing projects often disappear, leaving intended beneficiaries without support. Transparency and accountability in governance are essential to ensure that resources reach those most in need. The government has made attempts to address homelessness, such as the National Housing Fund, but these efforts are often hampered by bureaucratic inefficiency and corruption. Income inequality is another pressing issue. While Nigeria boasts some of Africa's wealthiest individuals, a large portion of the population lives on less than $2 a day. The country's oil wealth has not been equitably distributed, leading to resentment and disillusionment. Economic diversification and job creation are crucial for tackling the root causes of homelessness. Social stigma also plays a role. Homeless individuals are often marginalized and criminalized, facing police harassment and societal exclusion. Addressing homelessness requires not just economic solutions but also a shift in societal attitudes. People need to recognize the homeless as fellow citizens deserving of dignity and support. 8. Venezuela. Venezuela's homelessness crisis is a stark example of how political and economic instability can devastate a nation. Once celebrated as one of South America's wealthiest countries, Venezuela is now battling an ongoing humanitarian catastrophe. Over the last decade, hyperinflation, mismanagement of resources, and widespread corruption have plunged millions of Venezuelans into poverty, leaving many without stable housing. The country's economic collapse has been catastrophic. Once abundant goods have become scarce, and prices for basic necessities like food and medicine have skyrocketed. Families who once lived in secure homes have been forced to sell their possessions to survive, often ending up on the streets or in overcrowded shelters. Makeshift camps are now a common sight in urban areas like Caracas and Maracaibo, where the homeless population has grown exponentially. Venezuela's housing crisis isn't limited to urban areas. In rural regions, agricultural instability has driven families off their land. Many migrate to cities in search of work, only to find a lack of employment opportunities and skyrocketing rental prices. The government has made attempts to address the issue, including public housing projects under the Gran Misión Vivienda Venezuela initiative. While millions of homes were reportedly built under this program, allegations of corruption, mismanagement, and favoritism have limited its effectiveness. Beyond economic issues, political unrest has exacerbated the crisis. Frequent protests, crackdowns, and a lack of security have disrupted daily life. For many Venezuelans, homelessness isn't just a matter of shelter. It's about survival in a collapsing society. Those who flee the country in search of better opportunities often face homelessness in neighboring nations. Countries like Colombia, Peru, and Brazil have seen an influx of Venezuelan migrants, many of whom arrive with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Refugee camps along the borders are overcrowded and underfunded, struggling to meet the needs of thousands of displaced families. Children are among the most vulnerable. Homeless Venezuelan children often live on the streets, facing hunger, abuse, and lack of education. Many turn to begging or informal work, while others become victims of trafficking and exploitation. The long-term consequences of this lost generation are a major concern for both Venezuela and neighboring countries. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and international aid groups have stepped in to provide some relief, but their efforts are constrained by political roadblocks and insufficient funding. Humanitarian aid shipments are often delayed or outright rejected by the Venezuelan government, which views external assistance as a threat to its sovereignty. This has left millions of Venezuelans in limbo, reliant on informal networks and grassroots efforts to survive. Rebuilding Venezuela and addressing its homelessness crisis will require systemic reforms and international cooperation. Economic stabilization, anti-corruption measures, and investment in social infrastructure are critical. Additionally, the global community must provide long-term support for Venezuelan refugees, ensuring they have access to housing, education, and employment in their host countries. The story of Venezuela's homelessness crisis is a tragic reminder of the far-reaching consequences of political and economic mismanagement. It is a crisis that affects not only those within the country but also the broader region, as millions of displaced Venezuelans seek safety and stability elsewhere. 7. United States. Despite being one of the world's wealthiest nations, the United States faces a homelessness crisis that challenges its image as a land of opportunity. With over 580,000 homeless individuals, the U.S. grapples with a multifaceted issue driven by high housing costs, systemic inequality, and a lack of social safety nets. Homelessness in America takes many forms, from families living in cars to individuals sleeping in tents on sidewalks. The problem is most visible in major cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York City. Los Angeles, for instance, has over 70,000 homeless people, many of whom live in sprawling encampments that line city streets and highways. Rising rents and stagnant wages have pushed even middle-income families to the brink, making homelessness a reality for a growing number of Americans. Mental health challenges and substance abuse are significant contributors to homelessness in the U.S. Decades of underfunding mental health services have left many individuals without the care they need. Veterans are particularly affected. Many struggle with PTSD and other conditions after returning from service, often with insufficient support systems. For families, the crisis is especially devastating. An increasing number of children are experiencing homelessness, living in motels, shelters, or temporary accommodations. These conditions disrupt their education, mental health, and overall well-being. Single mothers, often the primary caregivers, face unique challenges, including limited access to childcare and stable employment. The U.S. government has implemented programs to combat homelessness, such as the Housing First Initiative, which prioritizes providing permanent housing before addressing other issues like employment or addiction. While these programs have shown success in some regions, they are not implemented consistently across the country. Federal funding for affordable housing remains insufficient, and many states lack the resources to address the problem comprehensively. Systemic racism also plays a role in America's homelessness crisis. Black Americans, who make up 13% of the population, account for over 40% of the homeless population. This disparity reflects broader inequities in housing, employment, and access to social services. Addressing these racial disparities is essential for creating long-term solutions. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the homelessness crisis became even more pronounced. Evictions surged as millions lost their jobs, and temporary moratoriums on evictions provided only a short-term solution. The pandemic also exposed the fragility of America's safety net, highlighting the need for more robust social policies. Nonprofit organizations and community initiatives play a crucial role in mitigating the impact of homelessness. Shelters, food banks, and outreach programs provide essential services, often relying on donations and volunteer efforts. However, these efforts are not enough to address the root causes of homelessness, such as the lack of affordable housing and income inequality. Solutions to America's homelessness crisis require a multifaceted approach. Expanding affordable housing, increasing mental health and addiction services, and implementing policies to prevent evictions are key steps. Additionally, addressing income inequality through measures like a higher minimum wage and tax reforms can help reduce the financial strain on low-income families. The contrast between the U.S.'s immense wealth and its homelessness crisis underscores the need for systemic change. Homelessness is not just a personal failing. It is a societal issue that reflects broader inequities. By prioritizing housing as a basic human right, the U.S. can move closer to fulfilling its promise as a land of opportunity for all. South Africa. South Africa, a nation renowned for its breathtaking landscapes and rich cultural heritage, also faces a significant homelessness crisis. In urban centers like Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban, homelessness is a visible and pressing issue. Tens of thousands of individuals live in informal settlements, on city streets, or in makeshift shelters, often in unsafe and inhumane conditions. The root causes of homelessness in South Africa are deeply tied to its history and socio-economic inequalities. The legacy of apartheid continues to shape the country's economic landscape, with many Black South Africans facing systemic barriers to housing, education, and job opportunities. Despite the end of apartheid in 1994, disparities in wealth and access to resources remain stark. The unemployment rate, which hovers around 30%, leaves many families unable to afford basic housing. In cities, the growth of informal settlements has become a defining feature of the urban landscape. These settlements, often referred to as squatter camps, lack proper sanitation, electricity, and running water. Residents construct homes from scrap materials, which offer little protection from the elements. Fires, floods, and other hazards are common, adding to the instability faced by those living in these areas. Migration from rural areas to urban centers has further exacerbated the housing crisis. Many individuals move to cities in search of work, only to find that the cost of living far exceeds their means. Without affordable housing options, they are forced to join the ranks of the urban homeless. The South African government has made efforts to address the housing crisis through programs like the Reconstruction and Development Program, RDP, which provides free or low-cost housing to low-income families. However, the demand for housing far outstrips supply, leaving millions on waiting lists that can last for years. Corruption and mismanagement have also hindered the effectiveness of these programs, further delaying relief for those in need. Homelessness in South Africa is not just about a lack of shelter. It is often accompanied by other challenges, such as substance abuse, mental health issues, and exposure to crime. Many homeless individuals struggle to access healthcare, education, and social services, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and marginalization. Women and children are particularly vulnerable, with many women fleeing domestic violence only to find themselves homeless and at risk of exploitation. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and community groups have stepped in to fill some of the gaps left by government programs. These organizations provide temporary shelters, food, and other forms of assistance to homeless individuals. However, their resources are limited, and the scale of the problem remains overwhelming. Addressing homelessness in South Africa requires a multifaceted approach. This includes increasing the availability of affordable housing, creating job opportunities, and providing support services for those struggling with addiction and mental health issues. Tackling systemic inequality is also essential to ensure that all South Africans have the opportunity to live in dignity and stability. South Africa's homelessness crisis is a poignant reminder of the challenges that persist in a country still grappling with the effects of its complex history. Despite the difficulties, there is hope that with concerted effort and commitment, meaningful change can be achieved. Brazil. Brazil, the largest country in South America, is grappling with a significant homelessness crisis, particularly in its urban centers. Major cities like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Belo Horizonte are home to sprawling favelas and thousands of individuals living on the streets. The country's economic disparities and lack of affordable housing have created a stark divide between the wealthy elite and the millions struggling to find a stable place to call home. Currently, over 220,000 people in Brazil are officially classified as homeless, but the true number is likely much higher. This includes individuals living in shelters, on sidewalks, or in makeshift encampments. The housing crisis in Brazil is largely driven by poverty and unemployment. Despite being one of the largest economies in the world, Brazil has a high level of income inequality, with many families unable to afford housing in rapidly urbanizing areas. Favelas, or informal settlements, are a defining feature of urban homelessness in Brazil. These communities often lack basic services like clean water, sanitation, and electricity. Residents build homes from whatever materials are available, creating unsafe and overcrowded living conditions. Favelas are also frequently targeted by criminal organizations, making them dangerous places to live. The Brazilian government has implemented housing programs, such as Minha Casa, Minha Vida, My House, My Life, which aim to provide affordable housing to low-income families. While these initiatives have helped some, they are plagued by inefficiency and corruption, with many projects falling short of their goals. Additionally, the demand for affordable housing far exceeds supply, leaving countless families without options. Homelessness in Brazil is not limited to adults. Children and teenagers often live on the streets, particularly in larger cities. These youth face extreme hardships, including violence, exploitation, and substance abuse. Many are forced to beg or engage in illegal activities to survive, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and homelessness. The COVID-19 pandemic further exacerbated Brazil's homelessness crisis. Economic shutdowns led to job losses and evictions, pushing more families onto the streets. Meanwhile, the country's healthcare system struggled to address the needs of homeless populations, who were particularly vulnerable to the virus. Addressing homelessness in Brazil requires tackling its root causes, including poverty, unemployment, and systemic inequality. Expanding affordable housing programs, improving urban infrastructure, and providing social support for vulnerable populations are critical steps. Non-governmental organizations and community initiatives have also played a key role in offering immediate assistance, such as shelters and food distribution. Brazil's homelessness crisis highlights the broader challenges facing the country as it strives to balance economic growth with social equity. While progress has been made in some areas, much work remains to ensure that all Brazilians have access to safe and stable housing.